Hello there, my little goobs, Absolute here. If you've ever used a Vow of Enmity on a foe before, had your rogue trigger a fight from stealth with a sneak attack, or built a monk like the game suggests you should with a high dexterity and wisdom stat, then you've been making some pretty big mistakes. Today, I have the best pro tip for each and every class in Baldur's Gate 3 that will take your game knowledge and fight tactics to the next level. There are 12 classes in Baldur's Gate 3, and I'll be going through them in their popularity in which players decided to make their tabs. I do strongly recommend you watch all of them though, since these class tips will greatly benefit your understanding of the overall mechanics of the game, as well as the other companions in your party you will be controlling along with you. Even though you might be playing a Paladin, knowing the Rogue tip will help with understanding Astarion, or the Fighter tip with understanding Lae'zel. To be as concise as possible going forward, since we have a whole 12 classes in Baldur's Gate 3, I'll only spend about 90 seconds on each class, so let's get right into these rapid fire, high quality tips. First up, the most played class you all chose to start as in Baldur's Gate 3 is the Paladin. The most played subclass for Paladin happens to be the Oath of Vengeance. This variation of Paladin has the very powerful bonus action ability to use Vow of Enmity to gain advantage on attack rolls against a single enemy. This ability uses the Paladin's Channel Divinity, which is a resource replenished on short rest, making it usable in almost every encounter. Now, I said in the intro that if you use this ability on an enemy, you messed up. That's because you actually want to use the ability on yourself. Now, don't worry, this doesn't give advantage to opponents who attack you or anything like that. The way the game is coded, if you use Vow of Enmity on an enemy, that is the only foe affected by it, so you won't get the benefits of this from attacking somebody else. But if instead you use it on yourself, the ability will act like a buff, and the game will see that it's applied to every single attack roll, so you get advantage no matter who you decide to attack. Use this ability at the start of the fight on yourself, and enjoy an extremely potent buff throughout the whole encounter. Next up, we have the Sorcerer following up just behind the Paladin. My tip comes from an overlooked feat called Dual Wielder. Sorcerers themselves don't get access to shields, so it's really just a perfect match. Taking the Dual Wielder feat as a Sorcerer is very good, allowing you to equip 2 magical staffs at the same time. Its +1 to AC is half the bonus a shield would allow as well. Even in the early game of Act 1, there is the Spell Sparkler staff at Joachim's Rest, and Melf's first staff sold by Blurg in the Underdark, which are obtainable by the time you get the Dual Wielder feat at level 4. Once you get to Act 2 and the Last Light Inn, you can replace the Spell Sparkler for the incandescent staff with the Merchant there. In Act 3, you'll want to get the Staff of Power inside the House of Hope, and Marco Heshkir at the Sorceress Sundries. What this feat allows you to do with the 2 uses of Arcane Battery these 2 staffs provide is insane. If you cast haste pre-combat from yourself, and assuming you have both of these items, you can twin cast Chain Lightning with your first action, twin cast Chain Lightning with your second hasted action, and quicken spell using your bonus action for a 5th Chain Lightning with your bonus action, for an average of 225 instant burst lightning damage that will hit multiple foes with no other bonuses accounted for from things like your subclass, magic items, or the wet condition. Getting all that magic out of our system, the next class we have is the Down-to-Earth Fighter. The most played fighter subclass is the Battlemaster, for good reason too. It is probably the most powerful, with a wide range of various maneuvers that can be applied to each and every attack for different situations. These maneuvers will recharge on a short rest and make attacks to do extra damage, but the additional effects are the real meat and potatoes here. You can trip people to make them prone and give your attacks advantage. You can frighten them to debilitate them from moving so that their attacks are at disadvantage, and even make a pushing attack to knock people off ledges. But the most powerful maneuver you need is the disarming attack. It is far far more powerful than any other maneuver by a lot. This is because of how Baldur's Gate 3 handles two main factors. The first is picking an item off the ground is a free action that anyone can do in combat. That means making an opponent drop their weapon and then picking it up and putting it in your inventory makes them useless for the entire rest of the fight. Secondly, even if you don't do this, equipping an item to a character is a full action, meaning that's going to be your opponent's full turn if that's what they want to do. So if you're going to play the most popular fighter subclass, make sure to always have this maneuver in your pocket at all points in the game. Moving on, we have Rogue, the sneaky scoundrels of Baldur's Gate. In this game, having that utility of a sneaky guy is really good. Having a character good at lockpicking and pickpocketing is extremely useful, but rogues are notoriously not strong in drawn-out combats. The difference in damage between a fighter and a rogue will look something like this. The rogue will do great in the first round with their assassination features, but will easily become outpaced by the second round of fighting and beyond. My tip for you is to simply never let them get in the combat. The way we'll do this is unlinking our rogue from the party. We want to keep them hidden outside of combat so they can continuously pick off low HP stragglers. The way the game is coded, if you attack an enemy and they survive, initiative will trigger and a fight will begin. But if you defeat that creature in a single attack and don't get seen from stealth, it does not trigger a fight. This means if your rogue casually sits outside combat in stealth, they can have infinite attacks and sneak attack triggers in a single round of combat as long as they keep landing finishing blows. This means the most effective way to play a rogue character in combat is to not let them get in combat. Next up, we have the classic Barbarian for all you Karlach lovers out there. The tooltip for Reckless Attack says, until your next turn, you have advantage on attack rolls, but your enemies also have advantage against you. This is extraordinarily misleading, and if you ever activate this ability from your toolbar, you're misusing it. It should only ever be used as a reaction. See, in Baldur's Gate 3, if you have Reckless Attack but just make a normal attack and then miss, the game will prompt you to re-roll that attack. You can make an attack, and if you hit, awesome. Now you don't need to use Reckless Attack, so your enemies don't have advantage on you from Reckless Attack's downside. But if you do miss your attack, you can then decide to retry that attack once prompted after knowing you initially missed. Technically speaking, there is an extremely minor damage increase from Reckless Attacking initially, because there is a small chance that you can turn regular hits into critical hits from the advantage. But that minor average damage increase usually isn't worth Reckless Attack's downside if you can avoid it, especially with all the hardest fights in Baldur's Gate 3 being against multiple enemies that will punish you for using this feature too often. As long as you use this ability in this way, you essentially have infinite luck points or inspirations, as knowing you failed and then re-rolling is way more powerful than just using advantage when you never needed it to begin with. Finally, moving back towards some magic users after our time away, Warlock is the next most played class you all started out as. This tip is directed at one of the two most common ways to play the Warlock. The first is the Eldritch Blast machine gun, which just takes Eldritch Blast along with Agonizing Blast and Repelling Blast to do tons of ranged damage, push enemies around, and enjoy the benefits of the rarely resisted force damage. The other most common way to play the Warlock is to become a spell sword. This comes from the Pact of the Blade, which is a feature that allows you to stab people with your charisma rather than your muscles. At level 5, the Pact of the Blade upgrades with Deepened Pact and gives an extra attack. However, it is specifically not the extra attack feature. That means that yes, it can stack with extra attack. Larian Studios project manager Emily even said it was not a bug in an official post. This means it allows for one of the strongest multi-classes in D&D to be even stronger. 5 levels in Paladin and 5 levels in Warlock means a heavily armored character attacking 3 times per turn with their charisma stat. So play that ultra powerful Lock-it-in as one of the few people that know that these 2 extra attacks do indeed stack with one another. Next, we have the masters of the weave and the arcane arts, wizards. What you're about to learn is going to ruin any full level wizard. Taking just a 1-level dip in wizard lets you learn whatever spells you want as long as you find the scroll for that spell and have the slots to cast it. That means any caster, like a bard, cleric, or druid, benefits vastly from a 1-level wizard dip. If a character is a 4th level cleric with a 1-level wizard dip and you find a scroll of fireball, you can go into your inventory and permanently learn that spell because you have 3rd level spell slots. This means any caster with a 1-level dip in wizard can essentially do all the things a straight wizard would be able to do at that level. This becomes absolutely broken after grabbing the circlet that sets a character's intelligence to 16 found in the Blighted Village on an ogre in Act 1. This tiny dip means casters that don't get access to some of the most powerful spells can have them. Bards can now have shield, druids can have fireball, sorcerers can have familiars, and clerics can have haste, and so on. The possibilities are endless, and almost any full caster I play takes a 1-level wizard dip for this exact reason. Keeping on the magic train, we have the Bard, my personal favorite class. I love it so much because you can make them be whatever you want them to be. A Swords Bard makes for an excellent martial character with their flourish abilities alongside the full spell slot leveling of a wizard, giving the damage output of a fighter and the spell casting of a caster in a single character. Alternatively, Lore Bards give access to spells from other classes, like the Cleric's powerful Spirit Guardians or a Wizard's counterspell. But the most overlooked feature a Bard has by far is their Song of Rest. Now, those of you that have played a Bard know this, but those of you that haven't probably don't know this, especially because there is no recruitable companion that is a Bard inherently. Song of Rest allows your party to take an extra short rest, meaning 3 short rests per day instead of 2. In Honor mode, this is almost a necessity. The reason being is because a single game over means restarting the whole thing, so you better be short resting after every single encounter to be safe. And then once you're out of short rests, you have to take a long rest. The doubled cost of camp supplies each time you do take a long rest, with the inability to go back to previous save files, means long resting too frequently can lead to a supply problem if you aren't careful. Having a Bard around will absolutely fix this issue for you. And since you can make a Bard be whatever you want them to be, I always have at least one in my party. Moving on to the last third of classes, we have the insanely complicated Druid. Unsurprisingly, Moon Druid is the most played Druid subclass, which also happens to be Halsin's class if you recruit him on your journey in Act 2. I think Druid's main pull is the fantasy of being a shapeshifter, so my pro Druid tip for you all is to understand exactly what carries over in Wild Shape and what doesn't. There's a lot to cover for Druids, so these will be rapid fire. For feats, Athlete's passive bonus to standing up from prone and jumping use less movement speed works. Heavily armored gives a +1 to strength while wild shaped. Durable gives a +1 to constitution while wild shaped and fully heals you on a short rest. Dual wielder gives you a +1 to your wild shape armor class if you are dual wielding before wild shaping. Resilient gives a +1 to whatever stat you chose and grants proficiency. Warcaster keeps advantage on concentration spells while wild shaped. Tavern Brawler works for any wild shape that doesn't use a weapon. Savage Attacker works for any wild shape that does use a weapon. Sentinel works for any wild shape that uses a weapon. Lucky functions completely normally. Mobile functions completely normally. And Mage Slayer's passive that gives enemies hit disadvantage on concentration saving throws for spells works. The best feat for Moon Druid is undoubtedly Tavern Brawler, but all of these feats work as I've said. For races, Gnomes keep their advantage on Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma saving throws. Tieflings' Hellish Resistance stays. Half-Orcs' Savage attacks work, but only in the forms that have weapons. And Wood Elves' bonus movement works as well. For Illithid powers, Free Cast can give you a free wild shape charge. Favorable Beginning works as intended. Ability Drain works as intended. Displace works as intended. And Cull the Weak works as intended. Lastly, permanent stat bonuses also carry over. The Hag's Hair in Act 1, the Vampire Blood Potion from Moonrise Towers in Act 2, and the Shar's Mirror in Act 3 all carry over in your wild shape form. With only 3 classes to go, Monk is here. The Monk class benefits insanely hard from the feat Tavern Brawler, as their whole thing is making unarmed strikes. This means playing a strength-based Monk is way better than a dexterity-based Monk just because of how insane this feat is. Letting you use your strength modifier twice for attack and damage rolls is crazy overpowered. Also, the feat is what we call a half feat, meaning it can give you a +1 to strength, which is half of what an ability score improvement would do. Starting the game with a 17 in your strength gets you to an 18 when you take this at level 4. Since we will be dumping dexterity, we will also want to wear armor. The only feature this affects for monks is the increase to your base speed from unarmored movement. Everything else isn't affected. This means that the best monks are generally Githyanki, since they have a racial bonus that gives medium armor proficiency. Regardless of whether you want your monk to be wearing armor or not for the better armor class, or want to keep them more true to the traditional sense of a monk, make sure to max out their strength as much as possible and take the Tavern Brawler feat. Our runner-up for the least played Tav is Ranger, which is a shame because they are a really cool class. The most played subclass for Ranger is the Beastmaster, which makes total sense. If I was going to play as a Ranger, I'd also want to have an awesome animal companion by my side. My best pro tip I can give you for the Ranger is the objectively best animal companion from a mechanical standpoint. The complex answer is going to be using the animal companion to shore up the weakness of your party. For instance, if you don't have a designated tank character, you should probably use the bear. But generally, if you don't need something in particular, the answer is the spider. Having an animal companion that can cast the 2nd level spell Web every single turn infinitely is really good. The restrained condition that Web inflicts is very powerful as it stops all movement. Attacks against them have advantage and their attacks against you will have disadvantage. On top of that, their ability to apply the poisoned condition from their normal bite is just as powerful when debuffing enemies. Their mobility is also very good. Generally speaking, the spider is going to be the best animal companion for you. And to wrap up my #1 tip for each class, we have the Cleric, the least played class you all chose to play as in Baldur's Gate 3. My best pro tip for the Cleric class is to have one back at your camp. I am absolutely not joking, and I've mentioned this in my past videos. I call them Camp Clerics, and they are specifically designed to aid you on your journey while staying behind. To do this, take all the spells on a Cleric's spell list that last until a long rest and use them before you leave camp at the beginning of the day. Starting at just level 3 in your game, each Cleric can cast Aid and Warding Bond on a party member with their 2 2nd level spell slots, giving your party members 5 extra maximum hit points from Aid and resistance to all damage and a +1 to armor class from Warding Bond. Later on into the game and at higher levels, this will just become even stronger with all the other spells you can cast on an ally to buff them further. Hello there, my little goobs. Outro Absolute here. If you want to directly support me and the channel, there's a link to a Patreon down below with some cool benefits. But just watching the video helps immensely, so thank you. If this did happen to help you out or teach you something new, consider subscribing so that you can see all my new future content. It not only helps out the channel, but the more people that know these things, the better. If you want to see more BG3 guides, check out the other videos here on the channel. I really hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you little goobs later.